What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and I'm very excited for this video because this new game, No Rest for the Wicked, is a game that I've been really looking forward to. So I am a huge fan of the Ori and the Blind Forest games, and the studio that made those games, Moon Studios, just put out this new game, No Rest for the Wicked. And of course, since I'm making this video, I've played it and I want to talk about it. So without further ado, let's rock. A quick disclaimer before we get in the meat and potatoes of this video. I'm considering this my first impressions of No Rest for the Wicked, not my full review. And there's two reasons for that. One, this game is still in early access, so I would never give a full review of an early access game. And two, I have played 15 hours of this game, and in my opinion, that's enough to give my full first impressions, but I haven't actually played everything this game has to offer. So therefore, this video is going to be a little bit looser than a full review would be. But before we get to the actual first impressions, we do have some housekeeping to get out of the way. No Rest for the Wicked released in early access on April 18th. Like I said earlier, this game was developed by Moon Studios and published by Private Division. Moon Studios has only developed 3 games, Ori and the Blind Forest, and its sequel, Will of the Wisps, and now No Rest for the Wicked. And I've had No Rest for the Wicked marked on my calendar because I love the Ori games. If you are watching this, well, you obviously are watching this, but if you are watching this and love Metroidvania platformers like Hollow Knight and you haven't played the Ori games, I don't know what you're doing with your life. They are great platformers that tell a compelling story with almost no dialogue. I don't think there's a single line of dialogue, which is really difficult to tell such a great story with no dialogue. The art style is breathtaking. They use the whole area, the whole screen. The use of foreground and background is beautiful in those games. The sound design is great as well. It has one of the best soundtrack of any recent video games, which is surprising that they didn't do the same for No Rest for the Wicked. It is kind of a gothic game, so my elder emo that I was listening to on Spotify as I backtracked in this game was appropriate, but it was very strange that a studio that put so much emphasis on a great soundtrack with its previous games didn't have music in this game. Now, Moon Studios does have plans to take No Rest for the Wicked to Xbox and PlayStation in the near future, but as of right now, while it's still in early access, it's currently only available on Steam for the list price of $39.99. And I know some people just threw up in their mouths when I said $39.99 for an early access game. However, like I said, I've already played this game for about 15 hours and I still haven't seen everything this game has to offer. So that's not bad, especially considering since it is still in early access, you would assume they're going to add more to the game, and I have no reason to suspect that they won't. And assuming that they don't charge you more for that added content, $39.99, basically $40, I think it's a pretty good deal. But is that content worth your time? So I'll start off this video with the most basic analysis. Not all early access games are created equal. When No Rest for the Wicked says it's early access, it means early access. This game needs a lot of work. Honestly, I was a bit conflicted when I saw the trailer for this game because I am, on one hand, a huge fan of the Ori game, so I was hyped for another game from that studio. But on the other hand, the gameplay did look like a top-down action RPG, much like Diablo and Hades. And while those games are well made and have their fans, that style just isn't my cup of tea. So I was excited that they were making a new game. I was just a little confused by the genre that they were developing. Now that I've played No Rest for the Wicked, I can say that I'm pleasantly surprised that this really isn't a Diablo clone. Yes, the camera angle's the same, but it's much more of a Soulsborne game with the top-down camera angle of a Diablo or a Hades game. You have your block, dodge, and of course parry in No Rest for the Wicked. Those actions, including striking, is tied to a stamina meter, which is pretty much what you would come to expect from a Soulsborne game. My main complaint with Diablo types of games, which I assumed No Rest for the Wicked was going to be, is sometimes they can turn into these brainless hack and slash button mashing affairs. And No Rest for the Wicked is slower and more deliberate, especially when it comes to one-on-one combat. You have to stay focused and plan your defense and attacks. You can't just mindlessly push buttons. You need to know the enemy's attacks, which attacks you can block, which attacks you can parry, and which ones you just need to roll away from. So it takes a lot more focus and planning than a Diablo type of game, where again it kind of becomes more of just a button mashing hack and slash. Now, when you do face off against more than one enemy, it can become a lot more chaotic. I think the enemy AI could be fine-tuned a little bit more. I do think that needs some cleaning up so it doesn't become just an absolute chaotic button mashing hack and slash like the Diablo games can be. But I like the Soulsborne type of combat, and I'm definitely happy to see a different style of game implement those combat mechanics, even though they don't do it perfectly. So let's dig into those mechanics. You do have a carrying capacity that will affect your movement speed, which is pretty standard with these types of games. I will say in this particular game, the item weights need to be balanced pretty bad, because any weapon or armor worth a shit is way too heavy. But in No Rest for the Wicked, you also have special moves that are tied to a meter called Focus. Each special move, which can be applied to a weapon by purchasing and attaching runes, depletes a certain amount of focus. Focus can only be replenished by unlocking certain armor or weapons with focus buffs, or by simply doing damage to enemies. You can also upgrade how large your focus meter is by leveling up. Every time you level up, you get 3 skill points to apply. The big 4 that I have been leveling up, of course, are health, stamina, focus, and weight capacity. Again, carrying stuff in this game, if it's worth a shit, is just way too heavy, so I have been dumping a lot of points into weight capacity. I have also thrown a few into strength just to do more damage in combat. Doing that combat is really satisfying. The weapons in No Rest for the Wicked feel like they have a little weight to them. I know I just complained about how heavy they are, but they do feel like they do have some of that weight when you swing them. The sparks that shoot out when you block with your shield, or the blood that spills when you connect, is awesome. You can get this fire damage buff on your weapon that literally lights your weapon on fire, and it looks badass. The animations for those special moves that I just talked about are awesome as well. However, the combat in No Rest for the Wicked is difficult and will punish you for your mistakes if you're not careful. I don't think it's quite to the level of most Soulsborne games it takes its inspiration from, but any noobs to the genre will definitely struggle. Therefore, you're going to take a lot of damage along the way, so you're going to need to heal. Some people are going to be turned off by the healing system in this game. I just have to say it. It isn't tied to like elixirs or health potions or whatever you want to call them in like an Elden Ring. You actually have to cook recipes more like you do in Breath of the Wild in order to heal. Some foods like apples or mushrooms can be consumed for a little health boost by themselves, but work way better in a recipe. But a majority of ingredients can only be consumed when cooked, so they will just literally sit in your inventory until you get to a campfire. Certainly, that healing system can be cumbersome, but eventually you can apply a healing rune that, once unlocked, it does most of my healing for me. So as long as you have the focus to spend on that, you can actually heal a lot easier and quicker with that rune, assuming that you have that focus to spend. All you Dark Souls players heard campfires and probably thought, well, that's how you save, right? Yes and no. There are campfires, but those are just for cooking. There are spots, I believe they're called Whispers in this game, that serve as this game's campfire or sites of grace. Luckily, enemies won't respawn when you use those sites. The enemies will eventually respawn, but it takes a while. So once you clear out an area, you are good for a while. You can kind of stroll through that area with your guard down a little bit, which makes dying a lot, which will most likely happen because, again, the combat is pretty punishing in this game, an easier pill to swallow because it doesn't feel like you have to start completely over. When the enemies do respawn, it does appear to be random, so the enemy that you fought the first time in a particular area won't be the same enemy the next time that you go through that same area. These sites also allow you to fast travel, but it's extremely limited. It's almost like I wish it wasn't in the game, because it's just a tease of fast travel. So the way that fast travel works in No Rest for the Wicked is you can only fast travel to your most recent Whisper, which can be somewhat helpful, especially when you want to travel back and forth from the battlefield to Sacrament, which is the main city and kind of serves as your base of operations. But outside of that, I basically never use fast travel because it's not helpful at all. The fast travel is just a minor issue I have with the gameplay. The first major issue that needs to be cleaned up ASAP is, unfortunately, the parry system in this game is missing the precision of a From Software game that this game is clearly inspired by. So the parry in this game works well, I would say 80% of the time. But for a game that wants to be Elden Ring, it wants to be Dark Souls, that 20% really matters. So I basically no-hit the first boss, I would say third or fourth try against that boss, just because I was able to parry it and it worked perfectly. But not 30 minutes later, I got wrecked by a random enemy because I missed the parry using the exact same timing as before. It just doesn't feel like the parry timing is consistent. It's really easy to miss the parry and get staggered by an enemy, and then it's all over. They're going to hit you 3 or 4 times and you're probably going to be dead. It's very frustrating. These games are hard enough by themselves. Don't make them harder by giving us this loosey-goosey timing with the parry. Like I said earlier, no matter how good you are at these games, you're still probably going to die a lot. This game doesn't have the typical Soulsborne punishment for dying, however. Don't celebrate just yet, because I actually think its punishment for dying is worse than those games. There is weapon durability in No Rest for the Wicked, which by itself is pretty annoying. Anytime that you cut down a tree or mine for a mineral, your equipment degrades, which is annoying enough. But when you die, your weapons also degrade, which feels counterproductive to this genre of games. These games really want you to learn your enemy's moves, to learn when to parry, when to dodge, which of course involves a lot of trial and error. So to punish you for something that is inherent in the genre seems cruel and unusual punishment. Therefore, you are forced to travel to Sacrament a lot to have the blacksmith repair your weapons. I spent a good chunk of the money that I've made in this game just repairing my equipment because I die so much. There is a rune that you can attach to your weapon that repairs your equipment as well, but it costs a lot of focus, so that's also frustrating because I use focus a lot during combat, so to use it just to repair my weapons is super annoying. I was also a bit bummed by the platforming in this game. Honestly, this game really isn't a platformer per se, which surprised me because the Ori games are such great platformers, and I've said before on past videos that platformers are my favorite genre, so I was a little bit bummed that this game didn't have as good of platforming. There is some minor environmental puzzles, but calling them puzzles is kind of stretching it a little thin. I will say I did enjoy this game's use of vertical space. Anytime I got stuck and didn't know where to go, it usually meant I needed to go up or down, so that was kind of cool. My major issue with the platforming, which I am using in air quotes, is the camera angle made it very difficult to know when to climb and how to climb. There's literally a dungeon, it's probably the first dungeon that you're going to come across, it was the first dungeon that I came across, that had a section where it let you climb using this kind of invisible bridge that you could only see when you got really close to stepping on that bridge. And there were sometimes gaps in that bridge, so you would have to jump over those gaps. I died so many times due to bad jumps thanks to the camera angle, so that was obviously pretty frustrating. The Whisper in that particular dungeon was also at the beginning of the puzzle, so I would literally have to start completely over, which was really, really annoying. There's also a shimmy mechanic that makes platforming, well, I should say, it should make platforming a lot more interesting. Unfortunately, I almost never used it because I never knew when I could use it. It's also the same button as the interact button, so I would tend to press it a lot just to see if I could interact with something, just to shimmy on a wall like an idiot. The game also does the Demon Souls thing where if you find a locked door that you don't have a key for, you're going to find that key eventually and you're going to have to backtrack and open that door. So there will be a lot of backtracking, whether it's finding the door for a key that you just found or farming for XP or materials. You will be visiting places over and over again. I did find that there's a decent difficulty spike after the first boss, so I actually backtracked a lot just to get stronger prepping for that next area. But surprisingly, I didn't really mind backtracking for two reasons. One, like I already stated, for the most part, I really enjoyed the combat, and two, the game looks great. Yes, I was disappointed that this game wasn't more of a platformer like the Ori games, but it certainly wasn't missing the artistic style of those games. It's a different style, but the quality of the art style is the same. The detail and the characters and the environment are next level, like you would expect from a studio that made the Ori and the Blind Forest games. There's a cool day-night cycle with weather as well. When it rains in this game, it really rains, and it feels like that matters in this game. I especially love the cutscenes. It looks like a painting come to life. I know that might sound cliche, but it's the best way I know to describe it. The emotion on the characters' faces, most notably when one finds out that his brother is dead, are pitch perfect. So I really enjoyed the cutscenes. Speaking of those cutscenes, I would give the story those cutscenes tell an incomplete right now. I am intrigued by the premise that they're setting, but because this game released in early access, they only allow you to play the first chunk of the story with more to come later. And it's really hard for me to get invested in a story I know I won't see the end for a while. It's also hard for me to get invested because much of the story is told from the perspective of other characters. Your character is almost an onlooker to the main story, which I felt was a weird choice. But again, this is just the first chapter of the story, so hopefully that could and will change. And again, I also haven't finished it yet, so maybe that does change by the end of this section. Who knows? Now, I did bury the lead on purpose. So if you've heard anything about No Rest for the Wicked, you probably heard that people are absolutely shitting on this game's awful performance. And if I'm being honest, I do have to agree with those gripes because the performance is very bad right now. I'm throwing up the PC specs on screen right now, and I will have to admit they are pretty hefty, but my PC is getting a little outdated. It's getting to the point where I do have to start looking up these specs before I decide to get a game on PC to make sure that my computer can handle it. And I didn't have to do that a year or two ago. I could just safely assume my PC could handle any game that was coming out. That's no longer the case. So I do want to say that some of this may just be my gaming PC, but based on the info that Moon Studios provided, my rig should handle it. My specs fall somewhere in between these two requirements, so you'd think it would run fine on like mid settings. Well, you'd be wrong. It runs pretty shitty on even the worst settings. Getting gameplay footage for this video was a nightmare. I thought my PC was gonna explode when I ran OBS and the game at the same time. And again, I am admitting my rig is not that impressive. So when stuff like this does happen, especially in the last year or two when it started to get more and more outdated, I assume that part of it is my PC and some of it might be. But I am hearing from people that have way better setups than I do that they are having the same exact problem. So I don't think it's my PC, at least a majority of it isn't my PC, it's the game itself. So hopefully they get that fine-tuned. Honestly, anytime I get a game on PC, I at least test to see if it runs well on my Steam Deck. I didn't even bother with No Rest for the Wicked because I knew based on how it ran on my actual PC that it was gonna run like absolute dog shit if it even ran on my Steam Deck at all. And I don't think there's a thing out there that PC gamers love to complain more about than performance issues, and this game definitely has a lot of it. Now, I'm not one to really complain about the frame rate or anything like that. It just does not play very well. It does not perform very well. And so that's very frustrating. And I think that out of everything that I've talked about, I know I've shit on this game here and there throughout this video. Honestly, I do like this game a lot, but it's still an early access game, so there's stuff that they need to clean up. But the bare minimum, the very first thing that should be on their to-do list is to optimize these performance issues, because it's going to turn off so many people. But like I said, I still think overall, especially grading on the early access curve that I think you should grade, this is a pretty good game. Minus the hit or miss parry system, the combat is really fun, which is great because there's a lot of it. The environment and character design are awesome. They look so good. And I typically don't give star ratings for first impressions videos, but to kind of give you a gauge where I'm at with No Rest for the Wicked, I would give this a provisional 3 out of 5 stars. It's still early access. There's still a lot of rough edges that need to be smoothed out, especially again with the performance issues, the parry system, a few things here and there, but it has enough potential that I'm really, really excited to see what they do with it. But as always, those are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. Of course, I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button, as the kids say. Also, consider subscribing. If you do subscribe, ding that bell. That way you're notified every time I post another video. I try to post weekly gaming related content. I know I haven't been great about that weekly thing recently, but I do try to post weekly gaming related content. So if you like this type of content, which you obviously do if you made it this far in the video, definitely consider subbing and dinging that bell. But until next video, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy. And we were just talking, and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?